We're up to Daf Mem Daled Amid Aleph, the top of the line, top of the page. Tana Rabbanon. One last point about a chilazon, about how to identify the chilazon, which they've been trying. By the way, the main two approaches of what the chilazon was over the last 150 years was the Radziner Rebbe from Ishbitz, the grandson of the Ishbitzer, Marcha Yosef Ishbitz's grandson, Yaakov. So he actually spent a year in Italy by the aquariums looking at each item. So Peldika Zach, you could imagine like one of the biggest tzaddikim, big makubal and tzaddik sitting by the aquariums looking at the items. And he decided based on his proofs in the Gemara, based on Metzias, he felt it was a cuttlefish. There's been tightness against it, not for now, and then now they're convinced it's a snail, a Murex trunculus. So it's different approaches. The issue you're always going to have is every Gemara, one Gemara describes it sounds like one, the other one describes it sounds like the other, but each one has a way for themselves. The Gemara says, what's the chilazon? Gufay doim liyam. Its body looks like the sea. So that, the cuttlefish actually fits like that because it's a little bit translucent, so it kind of looks, but they have a taina, their explanation by the snail is that although the snail shell looks brown and white, which doesn't look like the sea, apparently that's only after it's cleaned. But when a snail sits in the water for a long time, it grows this like fur, and it kind of looks like the ocean floor. Okay. Ubriyase doimli dag, but its anatomy looks like a fish. This is one of the reasons why he felt that it was a cuttlefish. They have a way to explain it, whatever it is. And it comes out of the water every 70 years. Now, none of them come out of the water every 70 years, so they have to explain it that it means more b'derech drush. It's very infrequent, whatever the pshat is. And they use the dye of its blood. Pasha is not blood; it's the ink sac to make the tcheles. Lafikach dam yikarim. Since the chilazon is it only comes on the land so infrequently, it's very, very expensive. Okay, now the Gemara over here has a very interesting ma'isa. The Gemara says the following story: Tanya Amar Rabbi Nasan, ein loch mitzvah kala shebetoicha sheksu b'toira she'ein be'matan schar b'oil mazeh. Even the smallest mitzvah, the Gemara describes as tzitzis. Now the reason why tzitzis is the smallest mitzvah, first of all, it's not very expensive, but also the punishment is not kares, it's not misa b'dei shemayim, it's a less severe mitzvah. Every mitzvah in the Torah, even the smallest mitzvah, has reward in this world, and the next world we can't even fathom the reward. Meaning, there's a little bit of reward in this world, and Olam Haba is roiv schar is in Olam Haba. How do we see? What's an example of reward for tzitzis in this world? So the Gemara says the following very interesting story. This will be an interesting podcast, Stories of Hope by Tzibor Graco. She'd have a good time with this ma'isa. So the Gemara says like this: Tzeil mam mitzvah tzitzis. Look at tzitzis. Ma'isa ba'adam echad sheyizar mitzvah tzitzis. There was a certain person who was always very particular with the mitzvah tzitzis. Now, despite that, he was also very into visiting prostitutes. That was so. By the way, it just goes to show you two things: that people can be contradictory. That's the famous Chaim Shmulevitz. He has a couple pieces on this. He calls it or v'choshech mishtamshim barbuvia. That you could have, a very confused individual, that he could be someone who goes to Zaynas, but also be very makbid on tzitzis. It shows you. But also, it also goes to show you, it's a good thing that he held on to Mr. Tzitzis, as we'll see. Mr. Tzitzis mamish held him on. Sometimes people make a presumption that if someone's imperfect and they're holding on to certain mitzvahs, it's like, what's the point? No, what they hold on to, let them hold on to that. So this person would go to Zaynas, but he was very makbid on tzitzis. Okay, so the story goes as follows. He heard about a certain Zayna that was very, very elite and very, very, very high end in a certain area, and she takes 400 zuhuvim of gold as a down payment to live with her. So this person, he pays up front and he sets a time to live with this woman. So that day comes, he goes for the appointment, he's sitting outside of her house. So the Zayna's maidservant says, your appointment is waiting outside. He had paid, was it up front? What do you call it? He sent the down payment early. So that person who already prepaid, that was the word. He already prepaid, he's sitting outside. So Amra Hiyikon, it's very interesting. The Gemara Mamish goes through each word. So she says, let him come in. So Nichnas, he enters the room. She prepared 7 beds for him, one on top of the other. 6 beds of silver and 1 of gold. It's unclear whether it means the actual beds were made of silver or gold, or the bedding was made of silver and gold. B'kitzur, very, very expensive setup. Ubein koachas v'achas sulam shel kesef, and between each bed there was a silver ladder to get to the next bed. Elyoina shel zav, the uppermost bed was made of gold. Also v'yasha al gabe elyoina kishiaruma, and she's sitting on the top bed undressed. Okay, so the Gemara says the following. This is what happened. Afhu ol leishev arum kenegda. So he starts climbing the ladder and he starts getting undressed to also be with her. Now bo arba tzitziyasa v'tavchay al panav. When he pulled off his talis, the tzitzis sort of hit him in the face. Sometimes when you rip off your tzitzis fast enough, so he's pulling off his tzitzis to be with the zayna, and the tzitzis hits him in the face. And the Gemara says the following. The Gemara says, "Bo arba tzitzis nishma v'yoshav agabe karka." He stops walking up the ladder and he sits on the floor. He refuses to go up. He says, "I'm not interested," and he sits on the floor. So nishma v'yoshav agabe karka. Afi nishma v'yoshav agabe karka. So she gets off the bed and goes down, sits down next to him. Amr loy, she said, "Gapa shel roimi," by the master of Rome. That was a terminology for an oath, meaning I swear, sheini manichesa, I will not let you leave. Achetarmeli marum mamur marisabai. She said, "What's wrong with me that you refuse?" I mean, this killed her self-esteem. That she was like the top-end escort, and all of a sudden he refuses to. And she said, "Well, what's wrong?" So Amr Allah, he said, "Havoida." He says, "I swear, I've never seen anyone as beautiful as you. There's nothing wrong with you. However, but there's one mitzvah that Hashem our God commanded us." She's a guy, by the way, just for the record. Obviously, you know that she's not Jewish. But that one mitzvah is tzitzis. Uksivba, and it says regarding tzitzis, Ani Hashem Elokeichem. It says Ani Hashem Elokeichem twice in the parsha of tzitzis. And what does it mean twice? Ani hu sha'asa li para, v'ani sha'asa l'shalom schar. That Ani Hashem Elokeichem twice means that Hashem is neman to punish or reward. And he said basically, when the tzitzis hit me in my face, I realized I can't do this. Achshav nidmu alai ka'arba edim. The 4 strings are like 4 witnesses testifying. 2 to punish and 2 to reward. So I can't do this. So she said, I'm out. So Amrullah, she said, Eini manichecha shetaimrli. So she said, do not leave this room until Mashemecha, I want to know your name. Mashem Irecha, what city are you from? Umashem Rabbecha, what's the name of your Rebbe? Umashem Midrashecha Shatolama B'Torah. What yeshiva are you a part of? But it was a yeshiva bacher. It's an interesting. So she said, I need to know your name, where you live, who's your Rebbe, and what yeshiva you go to. So, all right, Kasav Nasbiyadi. So he writes a whole document, basically saying his name, his yeshiva, all that stuff. Amda, so she hears this. So she wants to convert. So Chilka Kol Nechaseh, she was very, very wealthy, as you could tell by her the amount that she was charging per client. So she takes all of her estate and she splits it up into 3 parts. Shlish l'malchus, a third she gives to the government. V'shlish la'aniyim, a third to the poor. V'shlish natal biyada, and a third she keeps herself. Chutz ma'osim atzos, and although she distributed most of her wealth, the beds that she used to live with the clients, she kept that for herself. As we'll see, this is very similar to Rachav Hazayna, who eventually married Yeshua ben Nun. Those sometimes the avera, the chayfetz that you use the avera, that's also the chayfetz that you use for good things. So she wanted to keep those beds. Okay, so what does she do? Basel beis medrash or Rav Chia. She goes to the beis medrash of Rav Chia, Omerli Rebbe, because that Rav Chia was the Rebbe of this student, and she says, Rebbe, tziva lai v'yasas ki yoris. I want to convert. So the first question you ask a convert is, are you doing this for marriage? So Omerli Biti, Shema inecha nasat be'echem min hatalmidim. Are you doing this just because you're dating a Jew? So it's interesting, by the way. So look at this Maisa. It's very interesting. She gives him the document, and she explains the whole backstory, that she was a Zayna, and she, with this guy, and she was so impressed that his sincerity to keep Torah mitzvahs, that she said, I got to be a part of this religion. Now, by the way, she is coming to marry the guy, but the presumption is they understood that she's still a Shem Shemayim. It's a very interesting thing, because I was trying to look into this halacha. Everyone always makes an assumption that it's like, well, if you're interested in marrying a Jew, you're out. It's not so pashut, because she already proved that she was sincere. Because if she just wanted to live with guys, like with a Jew, she could do that. Like she could have lived with the Jew too. You know what I mean? She she's interested in marrying him, but she's interested in marrying him l'shem shemayim. You know what the Gemara concludes? The Gemara says, Amar Sir Chia told her, L'chi zechim mekachecha. Go purchase what you want, meaning go get the guy. I'm going to help you convert. And oisen matzoy shetzila be'isr, and those beds that you used to use to live with be'isr, etzila be'heter. That'll be the beds of your marriage that you'll live with him be'heter. And that's the ma'isa. By the way, just because to show you, he converted her. It's a very interesting thing. Lahalacha, he did not object to the conversion, despite the fact that she ultimately wanted to marry a Jew. The answer is because he recognized from the story that she was l'shem shemayim. It wasn't like she was dating and he said, "I'll only marry you if you're Jewish." There's no shaykhis. He just said, "I'm Jewish, I'm out," and she was just compelled. She was like, "I'm in," and she would also like to marry the guy. But the Vaisachais, he could tell that she was in, despite the marriage as well. And the Gemara, what's the point of the story? This is an example of tzitzis giving you reward in this world. That tzitzis saved that guy from living with a zayna. It helped her convert and helped them get married. So that's the schar of tzitzis in this world. And the reward for the next world, that I don't know. But that's the Maisa. And we'll end off just to finish up the Mishnah on Amid Beis is done with this topic. But just that was basically the cap. Just to finish up a little bit more, loose ends. Amar Rav Yehuda, talis she'ula. If I borrow a talis, what do I mean borrow a talis? I don't mean I borrow a beged with tzitzis on it. I borrow, Josh, I said, can I have a four-cornered beged? Yeah, sure, lend it to me. The question is, am I obligated to put tzitzis on it? Because v'asu lehachem, tzitzis implies that I own the beged. So it could be I'm allowed to wear it without tzitzis because it's not my beged. So says the Gemara, Tala Shula, Kol Shloishim Yoim Petur Min Tzitzis, Mekam Be'ela Chayeves. The answer is, am I obligated to put tzitzis on your beged? The answer is, it depends how long you borrow it for. You borrow it for 30 days? Yes. Less than 30 days? No. So 30 days is the barometer. And the Gemara says we find something very similar for 30 days regarding not tzitzis, but regarding mezuzah. The halacha is that if a person rents a house in Chutz La'aretz, you're not obligated to put up a mezuzah if you stay for less than 30 days. If I rent a house for 2 weeks, I'm not obligated to put a mezuzah. I rent a house for 30 days, I am. So you see, the 30 days makes it where you're no longer like an outsider. It becomes like yours in certain halachas. So it says the Gemara, Tanya Mihachi, we find a similar brisa. The brisa says, Hadar bepundiki be'Eretz Yisrael. Okay, Eretz Yisrael, as we're going to see, if you rent a house in Eretz Yisrael even for less than 30 days, you're obligated to put up a mezuzah. I'll explain why in a moment. So Eretz Yisrael, the only time you're potter from a mezuzah if you're staying by a pundik. A pundik is a hotel. You go to a hotel for one night, no mezuzah. Meaning a guy has a hotel, I just pay for one night. I'm definitely not obligated to mezuzah. It's because it's not even a rental. I'm literally for the night. That's b'chlal potter for sure. And hasoicha bayis b'chutz la'aretz kol shoshim potter mezuzah. And if you rent a house in chutz la'aretz less than 30 days, also potter. There's a shaila, by the way, if you rent a house in chutz la'aretz, no one rents houses for less than 30 days. It's not a thing. Pashas, a year, right? A year, I think, is the minimum. You're not going to get a guy rent you a house for 20 days. It doesn't work. You met Airbnb. But I'm saying, you're not going to rent like a full rental. See, we once had a situation where we went away for the summer, and we went away for a while, went to New Hampshire, we actually stayed for 30 days. It was so foolish on our part, because then I had to bring this, and it was a whole mess. Because if it was less than 30 days, I have no problem. Once you hit it was literally 30 days. But anyway, but if you stay for, let's say I rent a house for a year, from a guy, I rent a house for a year. Or even from a Jew, but they didn't put a mezuzah. So the question is, who's obligated to put a mezuzah? So, me or the Balabais. So, it's a shaila in the Paiskim, there's definitely a chiv mezuzah for 30 days. The question is, are you b'chai mezuzah right away? Or only after 30 days do you put it on? Meaning, if you rent a house for 3 years, you have a contract 3 years, you got married for 3 years. The question is, do you put up a mezuzah miyad or achar shloshim yoim? It's a shaila in the Paiskim. And what we practically do is we put it up right away without a bracha, and then after 30 days we take it off and put it on with the bracha. That's what they do. Okay, but that's in chutz la'aretz. Then the Gemara says, Kol sheish b'adam mezuzah, mekan ve'el chayiv. But after 30 days you chayiv. Stop. That's why we brought it down, because it's similar to tzitzis. Tzitzis and mezuzah is similar. So says the Gemara, mekan ve'el chayiv, aval soicher bayis be'Eretz Yisrael. But if you rent a house in Eretz Yisrael for 2 weeks, I rent a house for 20 days, chayiv. Ois mezuzah alti, chayiv mezuzah. Why? Mishum yishav Eretz Yisrael. Because we want houses in Eretz Yisrael to be staying by Yidden who put up mezuzahs. Now, by the way, what's the pshat? I put up a mezuzah after 20 days. Well, Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, what does that do? We want Yidden to take houses. So you rent a house from an Armenian guy for 2 weeks, you put up a mezuzah. Because Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. What's Yishuv Eretz Yisrael? Yishuv Eretz Yisrael means living in Eretz Yisrael. So Rashi says, because there's a halacha, that when you put up a mezuzah, you're not allowed to take it down if the next person coming in is a yid. So if I put up a mezuzah after 2 weeks, I may not leave so quickly. Meaning, put up a mezuzah is like, it's like mechayev me to stay longer because I can't leave until I can't take down my mezuzahs. So then your wife says, should we leave? You're like, I already got the mezuzahs up. Might as well stay. That's part of the cheshbon. Okay. Tefillin shel yad ina makeves. The Gemara had said, the Mishnah had said that the tefillin shel yad and tefillin shel roish are not ma'akev each other. Meaning, you could mekayim shel yad without shel roish, or shel roish without shel yad. Meaning, if you just have a shel yad, put on a shel yad. You just have a roish, put a shel roish. Says the Gemara, Amar Reb Chizda, loy shanu ela sheyesh loy aval ein lo makeves. Chizda said a very interesting thing, and that is, you're only allowed to wear one if you own both. Meaning, you show up to me and you say, can I just wear a shel roish? The Mishnah said yes. I mean, it's not great. Obviously, you're supposed to wear both, but the Mishnah said you could just wear one without the other. Reb Chizda says, no. It depends. Yeah, let me finish. The Mishnah says it depends. The Mishnah says it depends. If you own both, then you could put up one. I don't know why you're putting on one if you own both. Maybe you have a headache, whatever it is, you can't put it on your head. But if you don't own both, I just own a shel yad, then the Mishnah says you cannot. It's very strange. I don't understand. Is shel yad and shel rosh two separate mitzvahs? Rav Chizda is saying it depends. If you own both, then you can put on one without the other. If you don't own both, then you can only put on one. It doesn't make any sense. It says the Gemara, Amr loy amrit. They said to him, did you say this? So Rav Chizda changed his mind. Amr loy. I never said this. So the Gemara says, Lamad lesser trei mitzvahs cha mitzvah nam elavid. The Gemara says, Rav Chizda said, no, I never said this. He changed his mind because he said, what is, if you only have one mitzvah, should you just forego the one mitzvah? Meaning, originally Rav Chizda said that if you only own one pair, you can't put it on. But then he changed his mind. Because if you only have one, you should at least do one. You should at least do what you're going to do. So says the Gemara, Meikara Maisavar. Why is it that Rav Chizda originally said this? It's a very strange thing. If you hold that they're two separate mitzvahs, why did he originally say that if you only own one, you can't put it on? If you own both, then you can put on one. But if you only own one, you can't. Well, what's the pshat? Originally, why did he say that? He changed his mind, but originally, what was the pshat? The answer is, we're afraid that he'll make a mistake. Meaning, we're afraid that if people... He says the Gemara, why is it that originally he felt that if you only own one, you can't wear it? Only if you own two could you put on one. But if you own one, you can't. Why says the Gemara, Shemi Pasha? It's very simple. If I start telling people you only need to wear one, they're not going to buy both. Or are you going to say, save the money, it's so expensive, I'll only pay for a shel yad. And then when I get the money, I'll buy a shel rosh. See, if you bought both, you already spent the money, then fine. Then we're not afraid if you only wear one, we're not afraid of anything. But if you start publicly, that was Rav Chizda's originally svar, that if you start telling people, you only need to wear one, really, each one is a separate mitzvah, then people are going to be cheap, and they'll be like, I'm only just going to buy a shel rosh. I don't need a shel yad. And because of that, therefore, that was his original pshat, but he changed his mind. Rav Sheshes, let's speed a little bit. Rav Sheshes, Kol she'ena meniach tefillin. If you don't wear tefillin, oive b'shmein aseh, you're mevatel 8 aseh. Rashi goes through which one, but his first shot is there's 4 parshias in Shel Yad, 4 parshas Rosh, 4 plus 4 is 8. You're mevatel 8 mitzvahs if you don't wear tefillin every day. Kol she'en lo tzitzis b'bigda, if you don't wear tzitzis, oive b'chamish aseh, you're mevatel 5 mitzvahs. Which, by the way, means if you wear tzitzis, you're mechayim 5 mitzvahs aseh. Rashi says, what are the 5? V'asu v'nasnu v'haya risim v'gedil and taslach. Those 5 mitzvahs. Let's go weiter. If a kohen refuses to do birchas koyanim, he stands in the shul but he refuses to go up, then he's over 3 mitzvahs. And if you're not mekayim mitzvahs mezuzah, over b'shnei aseh, you're over 2 mitzvahs. Uksavtem. B'amar Rish Lakish says, Kol meniach tefillin marich yamim. Whoever wears tefillin has arichos yamim. Shenemer, go to the next page. Hashem eleikeich aleihem. This pasuk means that if the name of Hashem is upon you by wearing tefillin, you'll have arichos yamim. Okay, now back to the thing of Menachos. We're done that. Back to karbanos. Here's the deal. Most karbanos were animals, and then along came them 2 supplements: nesachim, which were wine libations, and minchas, which were bread karbanos. Says the Mishnah, Hasoilis v'Hashemin ein makvin sayayin. The bread carbon is not contingent on the wine. Meaning, let's say you show up to the Beis Hamikdash, you have the animal, great. And I said, you have the bread and the wine. You're like, ooh, I just have the wine. So bring the wine. We don't say that the bread and wine are totally in each other. You have one, do one without the other. In the last halacha, the carbon chatas, how many times did you place the blood? The average chatas, not the inner chatas, the average chatas, 4 corners. They're not makiv each other, meaning if you just did one corner, you yotza. We also had this many times before, although you're ideally supposed to put on all 4 corners, if you did one, you yotza. Zak the Gemara, here's the Gemara's discussion, very, very simple. You bring the carbon first, animal first, then you have the wine libation and the bread. Which is the order? Which one comes first? Bread and then wine, or wine then bread? That's the shaila. Bread or wine? Bread first then wine, or wine first then bread? That's the shaila. Says the Gemara, Tan Rabbanon, umin chasam v'niskayem. The pasuk says bread, then the wine libation. Habe mincha v'achabe nesachim. The Tanna Kama says you bring the bread first, then you bring the nesachim. Bread and then wine. Rabbi says no. Zevach nesachim. Habe zevach nesachim. No, wine and meaning animal, then wine, then bread. So Tanna Kama says bread, then wine. Rabbi says no, wine, then bread. It's a machlokes. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Nami. According to Rabbi, that it's the wine, then bread. Doesn't it say min chasam v'niskehem, bread first? What does he do with that pasuk? Rabbi says that pasuk is not telling me the order. That pasuk is telling me a separate halacha, and that is that if you show up with your animal karban, and I say, do you have your bread and wine? You're like, ooh, I left them both at home. You know what the halacha is? Bring them tomorrow. Bring them tomorrow night. They're not, meaning although they come as accompanying that carbon, they could be brought even not with said carbon. You could bring it the next day. And that's learned out from Menachos and Niskayim. So it's not telling you the order, it's just telling you those can be brought even without the animal. Says the Gemara, Rabbanan Nami Haksiv Zevach Unesachim. Either Rabbanan who say that it's bread then wine. What do they do with this pasuk, which is animal then wine, which implies that the wine is before the bread? Says the Gemara, they use that for Zeiri. Damar Zeiri, that pasuk is not telling me the order, rather it's telling me what point, if I bring wine, right? Josh brings wine for himself, but at some point I show up to the base of Mikdash also, he's like, oh, you can have my wine. Could he do that? At some point he could, but at some point he's got to stop, because at some point it's his wine for his carbon. What's the point where he can no longer transfer the wine for his carbon to someone else's carbon? The answer is the shechita. So when it says zevach u'nesachim, it's not telling you the order. It's not telling you that the wine libation is immediately following the animal before the bread. It's telling you, once you do the zevach, once you shecht, that wine libation is locked in for your carbon, and you can't transfer it to another carbon. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Nami biboyle kidiziri. But Rabbi also, shouldn't he need this halacha to teach you Ziri's halacha? Basically, they have like this. Each person has their own pasuk, but the other Tana use that pasuk to teach you another halacha. The problem is they all need those. The Rabbanan have their pasuk, and then Rebbe uses that pasuk to tell you you could bring the nesachim the next day. Don't the Rabbanan agree with that? So they all need each other's drushes. So what's going on over here? So says the Gemara, Elahaynu time of the Rabbanan. This is the Rabbanan's source that the mincha comes first. They say oila mincha, oila, then the mincha, then the wine libation. But Rabbi Nami Aksiv oila mincha. What does Rabbi do with this? Says the Gemara like this. Let's just make it simple. Because there's different psukim that imply Rebbe, different psukim that apply Rabbanan. The Gemara answers like this. When you're bringing an animal, and then you have the wine libation and the bread all at the same time, everyone agrees the order. And the order is as follows. If you show up with an animal and a bread and wine, proper order is it's bread, it's animal, then bread, then nesachim. Everybody agrees to that. What's the machlokes? The machlokes is as follows. If Menachos shows up with an animal, bread, and a wine, everyone agrees to that order. The machlokes is, if you show up, he shows up with the animal, I say, where's your bread and wine? He says, oh, I forgot. So I say, okay, come back tomorrow. Tomorrow he shows up, no animal, just bread and wine. The machlokes then is what's the order. That's when they argue bread, wine, or wine, bread. The Gemara says, if you were to bring it with an animal, it would be bread then wine. So do if you bring it the next day, it's also bread then wine. Keep it consistent. The Rebbe says no. The Rabbanan say no. When you bring it with the animal, we do food, drink. So animal, bread, wine. But when you bring it without the animal, there's no food anyway. I just have to choose between bread or wine. Wine first, because you sing Shira over the Nesachim. Just to finish up, we said in the Mishnah that by the average chatas, you're supposed to put it on all four corners, but if you did one, you're Yotza. Says the Gemara, Tanur Rabbanan, Menayim l'chol mitana mizbeach hachitzon shenasu b'tina achas keeper. How do I know by the average carbon, regardless of how many times you're supposed to do it on the outside mizbeach, the standard carbon, not the inner mizbeach, the outside mizbeach, regardless of how many placements of blood you're supposed to, 2, 4, whatever it is. But if you just did one, you're Yotza. How do I know this? If you merely pour the blood even one time, you're Yotza the carbon. Stop it.